All right, so thank you everybody for joining us tonight. My name is John Chase, and I'll be your host for Dressing for Paddling. So if you're here looking for Dressing for Paddling, you are in the right place. A couple of housekeeping items before we get rolling here. We are going to ask that everybody mutes themselves, and in fact, Milt's going to help us out with that. And he's going to basically mute everybody. Milt, you have the ability to do that, right?
I do. I'm going to mute everybody, John. Then you'll have to unmute yourself back. Okay.
All right, I can handle that. So here we go. All right, so we are back online. So if anytime you need to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself, but please make sure you mute yourself again because we don't want to hear Wheel of Fortune and dogs barking and everything else that's going on in the background. So we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to really participate in the presentation. For reference as well, at the bottom of your screen, so if you bring your cursor all the way down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little menu bar that'll pop up. And one of the items on that menu bar is chat. And so that chat will give you the opportunity to post your questions. So if you've got questions for me during the presentation, please feel free to add those in there. And Milt, I may ask for your help if you can moderate the chat. And if there's any questions that we need to answer at that particular moment, feel free to speak up and let me know what those might be. We will also make sure that we have time toward the end of the presentation to do some Q&A. And we'll also do an opportunity to do some, I guess I'll call it live demo of some equipment as well. So I'll have pictures and things that we're going to show of different pieces of clothing and gear, but I've actually got some of the gear here as well. So I'll switch over to another computer a little later on here, and we can show that stuff as well. So with that in mind, we'll get rolling here, and let me get the cursor in the right spot. So today's agenda, we're going to go through a few different things. We're going to start by talking about the environment that we're paddling in and how that's going to affect us in terms of our clothing choices. We'll talk about layering, and we'll go from basically the inside out for that. Talk outerwear, footwear, and then the all-important accessorizing toward the end here. And then, like I said, we'll do some live demo of a few things as well. So with that, I first wanted to kind of walk through this little piece here and talk about the different ways that our environment affects us. So whether it's heat or cold. So let's talk a little bit about through that. So first, the sun's obviously going to affect us. And we have direct radiation or direct heat from the sun. And that's something we need to protect ourselves from. Even more important for us on the water, we've got reflected radiation. So you've all been on the water and come off, and you found it even in the winter, you've got that red face. That's the reflected radiation. You've got water all around you, and that water is a really good mirror, and it's bouncing those rays right back at you. So that's one that we need to protect ourselves against as well. Moving down toward the bottom right is conduction. And so conduction is basically saying when you are in the water, your body and the water are great conductors. The water, if you are in water, the water will actually draw the heat away from your body 4 to 5 times faster than if you were just outside that water. So water is a great conductor of heat. It'll draw that away from your body very quickly. Our next one, just moving up from that, is convection, or convective cooling, I guess I'll call it, or convective heating, but more convective cooling is what we're going to deal with. And this is that 70 to 75 degree day when you've been out paddling and you're working up a sweat and you're feeling good, and you come off the water and there's a little light breeze, and that light breeze is now blowing across your body, and you've got some wet, you're wet. Water's blowing across the wind's blowing across your body, and it's going to cool you down very, very quickly. So that's that convective cooling. And we'll talk about some ways to be able to protect ourselves against that. And then radiation, or radiative cooling as well. So basically evaporation and the heat, pardon me, radiating away from the body. So those are all things that we need to be prepared for in terms of how we're dressing and being ready for paddling. So first I want to talk a little bit about cold water and what is considered cold water. So this is a little bit of content that I'm borrowing here from my friend Moulton Avery, and he's at coldwatersafety.org. If you're not familiar with coldwatersafety.org, it's the website of the National Center for Cold Water Safety. And Moulton has put a tremendous amount of resource out there to really teach people the myths and misconceptions about cold water, and give us an idea of where cold water really begins. So if we kind of walk through this chart a little bit, the left-hand side is Celsius, the right-hand side is Fahrenheit. So we're going to deal with the Fahrenheit here. And it's also dealing with body temperature and water temperature. All right, so 95 degrees is where hypothermia begins. And that's not the water temperature, but that's the body temperature. So hypothermia begins at that 90 to 95 degree point. Move down below that, and if you actually look off to the right, you'll see water feels warm, water feels nice, cool, cold, cold, and pain. So that warm is that 90 to 100 range. And that's right about our body temperature is where that water starts to feels warm. Feels nice, a little bit lower than that. And we get into the mid 80s and you're dealing with Olympic pools. And for a lot of people, an Olympic pool will feel quite cold. The water that we have around here rarely ever gets to the point where it's even close to what an Olympic pool will be. Lake Michigan temperatures in the heat of the summer right near the shore will get pretty close to 80 degrees, believe it or not, but it's not often that we get there. And Olympic pools are about 84 degrees, and I manage Olympic pools, and we've got people telling us all the time, the pool is too cold, yet it's 84 degrees. So, we often think, well, I can go out on that nice 70-degree April day, and the water's been warming up. It's okay. Well, it's not going to be 80 degrees. It's not going to feel nice. It's not even going to feel cool. It's going to feel quite cold, and that's really what we're trying to protect ourselves against, is that true cold water. Looking down the chart a little bit, really cold water is defined as water in the 60 to 70 degree range. In fact, there's as much damage, if not more damage, that's done in that 60 to 70 degree range in terms of water temperatures than any other. It's not often that we're well below that. You get below that 60 degree range and we're starting to deal with cold and pain. So very, very, very cold water is what we're dealing with. The sudden lowering of skin temperature from immersion in cold water represents the most prolific stimuli the body can encounter. I think it's prolific. Profound. There we go. My little people windows here on the side is covering that up. But that's an important thing to think about. Is we often think that warm water is still 60 degrees, but that's pretty cold water. So what happens when we end up in cold water? So there's three main things that happen when we go from in our boat to suddenly and surprisingly immersed in water. And that's kind of what's happening with us, is that as paddlers, we're not prepared for it. I hear all the time people say, well, I'm not planning to go in the water. Not many of us plan to capsize. So it's usually a surprise event. And when that happens, there's three things that can occur to the body when we're exposed to that sudden hit of cold water. The first is loss of breathing control. We start to hyperventilate. We can't control our breath. And that's obviously a problem when you're underwater. We start to gasp in water. And when you gasp a big breath full of water and you're underwater, you can imagine bad things go on at that particular point. Heart and blood pressure problems. When you are suddenly immersed in cold water, your blood vessels constrict and your blood pressure goes up considerably because of that constriction. So it's the second piece. And then the mental capacity of not knowing what happened to us, being disoriented, being surprised, being shocked. Cold water shock is not shock as though we're like medical shock, but it is the surprise of being immersed in cold water. So we need to make sure that we're fully protecting ourselves for that. So the 5 golden rules that cold water safety uses: first, always wear your PFD. It's not only for safety, just for regular drowning purposes, but if we are suddenly immersed in that surprisingly cold water and we start to lose our ability to mentally control ourselves, and we start to lose our ability to breathe, wearing your PFD is one thing that's going to keep you above surface. Don't care how good you swim, when you're faced with that kind of situation, swimming even the shortest amount of distance can be debilitating. Second, always dress for the water temperature. Regardless of what the air temperature is, we always want to dress for the water temperature. And I'm going to go back to that 70-something degree day that I was talking about earlier. Imagine yourself, it's that first 70-something degree day in April. You think this is fantastic. I can finally get the boat out. You get the shorts and the flip-flops out, and you head down to your local waterway, and we start to go paddling. And we don't really realize that the air temperature is 70 degrees, but the water just iced out and it's still 35 to 40 degrees. And when we go from a comfortable 70 degrees to our entire body being immersed in 40 degrees, bad things like we saw on the previous screen happen. Third rule, field test your gear. Now, that's different from the one below, which is swim test your gear. And field test your gear is basically saying, try all your gear out, know exactly how it works, know how the zippers work, know how the rest of your equipment works. It's not a matter of just having it, but it's knowing how all that stuff works and making sure you know how to do it upright so you keep yourself safe. The fourth one is swim test your gear. So a lot of people are reluctant to swim test their gear. I don't want to, I'm not sure if it's going to hold me, so I don't know if I want to swim test the gear. That's actually the number one reason that you should swim test your gear, is you want to make sure that when you are in this situation, when you have to count on that gear in order to keep you protected, that you want to know that that works well. So I encourage everybody to swim test your gear regularly. Some might even say swim test your gear every time you go out to make sure that that gear is still intact, that there's no leaks, that it's doing what it should be doing. If you're concerned about that and you're thinking, well, I don't know if this gear is going to keep me warm because A, it's not in good condition. You need to make sure that it is in good condition. Or B, I'm not sure if it's going to keep me warm because I'm not sure that I have the right gear. Then you've probably got the wrong gear. So we need to make sure that we've got the right stuff. And that's what our purpose is today, is to show and talk about the right kinds of gear for you. And the last is to imagine the worst and plan for it. As I mentioned earlier, very, very rarely do we ever plan to capsize. Only in a class when we're doing rescues and that sort of thing do we actually plan to go in the water. But other than that, it's a surprise event, and we are all in between swims as paddlers. So imagine the worst, plan for that, always dress for the water temperature. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, what about the rule of 120? I heard this rule of 120 on the internet, and I think that's just a fantastic thing. So in case you're not familiar with the rule of 120, the rule of 120 basically says if you take the air temperature and the water temperature and you add the two together and it's above 120, then you don't need to have protective gear. So let's think about that. That 80-degree day that we were talking about, 70, 80-degree day and 40-degree water. So there's a huge difference there. When I go from that 80-degree warm body and I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and suddenly and surprisingly, I'm immersed in 40-degree water, cold shock is going to happen. So the rule of 120 doesn't apply at all. In fact, if you hear the rule of 120, it's complete garbage. There's zero science behind the rule of 120. So please, please, please don't use the rule of 120 as your guideline. Always dress for the water temperature, always prepare for the worst, and know that your gear will do what it needs to do for you. So with that, we're going to move into our base layer. So this is not me, by the way. So our base layer. So we're going to start from the inside out. And our base layer, actually, we're going to talk about three things. Our base layer is the first one, our insulating layer, and then our protective layer being the third. So our base layer is basically that layer that's going to be next to our skin. So the tighty-whities you just saw, not necessarily those, because we want to stay away from cotton. So we want to have material that's going to draw moisture away from the body. But your base layer is whatever's right next to your skin, not containing cotton. It's going to draw moisture away from your body, and there are different weights to that. So basically, the higher the weight of that base layer, the more protective that base layer is going to be. And you also want a base layer that is seam-free. So for example, if you see these, they are seams, but when it says seam-free, basically you don't have that bulky seam that's spreading. You've got a flat stitched seam here. If you can see where my arrow is pointing along her cuff, that flat stitched, sorry, easy for me to say, right? That flat stitched seam is not going to rub and chafe and cause problems. So you want your base layer to be nice and comfortable for you. So there's another adage that you'll hear quite often if you're attending any of the Prairie State classes or anything, and that is, like I mentioned here earlier in the second one, no cotton. You want to stay away from cotton clothing, because cotton clothing does retain moisture. If you picture a towel, you've just gone, well, you've taken a shower, you end up toweling off, and now that towel is completely wet and it just soaks up the water. And it's doing its job, but you don't want that same thing right next to your body. So we want to have some polypropylene or something of that effect that's going to be that base layer, and it's going to draw the moisture or wick the moisture away from the body. So another example of a synthetic base layer. So This is a synthetic, so nice and lightweight, excellent wicking. Synthetic is very durable, so it can last for a long time, but the downside is that synthetic can trap odor. You can, no matter how many times you wash it, it may hold on to that odor. And I say may hold on to it because not all synthetics do, but some synthetic layers will actually hold onto moisture. I'll give you another example here. This is a lighter weight. This is from a company called Coolibar. And I've actually got a number of pieces of Coolibar clothing. It's Coolibar, in case you're taking any notes. But Coolibar basically makes SPF protective sunwear. And so this is synthetic wear, very lightweight, excellent wicking, like we saw earlier, durable, can trap odor, and this particular one offers sun protection. So they actually build SPF sun protection into their clothing, anywhere from about 50 on up from there. And one thing you may notice is that he's wearing sleeves as well, and you think, well, sleeves and sun protection, let's talk a little bit about that. We often think in the summer, I want less clothing on, right? So if I have less clothing on in the summer, then I'm going to be cooler. And if I have long sleeves on a hot 95, 100-degree day, will I be hotter or will I be cooler? So I read an interesting study recently, at least an abstract from a study, and it was, why do Bedouins wear black robes in the desert? And it was interesting that they did a study, and they had a number of folks in the desert, and they had them wearing black robes, white robes, and then they had somebody in shorts and a t-shirt. And they measured the amount of heat that was absorbed by that person's skin, or those people's skin. And the black robes and the white robes, they end up with the same amount of heat reaching the body. But then the black robe, actually, there's more heat that was absorbed by the black robe before it actually hit the body. And so they've been able to scientifically prove that wearing full clothing, or full coverage clothing in sun actually results in less heat to the body. So that's why you've seen, you start to see a lot of fishermen lately wearing full cover, same thing with sleeves, and you see a lot more full cover summer clothing as well. So that's a synthetic base layer. Even though it's a base layer, we're going to wear fewer layers the warmer the weather gets. So if we're in summer, we're going to wear this base layer. We aren't going to wear a base layer and a fleece layer and a few other layers on top of that. We might wear less. But that's one of the arguments for sleeves versus no sleeves. All right. Our next layer beyond that base layer is our insulating layer. So that's our second layer. So it can be synthetic, fleece, or wool. So those are all good examples of things. And what you see in the picture here is actually a fleece layer. And each of them will have different properties. So let's talk wool first. The wool we're thinking of today is not the same wool that you were thinking of many years ago. Love this picture. He's supposed to look dramatic, I guess, but it just kind of looks ridiculous if you ask me. But the wool that we're talking about today is not your grandfather's wool. It is nice, lightweight wool. It actually looks very much like any synthetic fabric, but wool insulates very, very well, very lightweight. It does wick moisture away, but it wicks it away from your body, but it retains that moisture in the core of the fabric. So the benefit is that it draws the moisture away. It's lightweight, but it does take longer to dry for wool material. So, I guess that's the same thing with sheep, right? But it takes longer to dry. So after you've taken that off, you're going to want to let that sit and either rotate that out with something else or just let it sit and let it dry away from your body. Wool is fairly durable, not going to be as durable as a synthetic, but the big advantage over synthetic, just as you see there on the bottom, no stank with that. So wool does not retain any odor. So I've got a few pieces of smart wool clothing and absolutely love them. Often when we think of wool, we think scratchy, we think, this guy, but wool is actually very, very soft. I've got a number of pairs of socks from Defeat, and I'll wear them all year round, and they're just a fantastic gear. So wool, good stuff. I'm going to go back to this for just a second. So I mentioned synthetic. So synthetic is basically the same thing that we saw in that base layer, but just a heavier layer. So if you've got that base layer that's drawing moisture away from the body and then getting it to that second insulating layer, that insulating layer is just designed to keep you warm. The synthetic will do that. Fleece will do that. Wool will do that. So that's our middle layer. We may end up having 4 layers as well if it gets really, really cold. But base layer, insulating layer or layers, and then our outer layer that we'll get to here. So we're starting to get to other layers here, and I want to talk a little bit about wetsuits versus dry suits. So first, let's talk a little bit about wetsuits. So the picture that I have here is actually a two-part or a two-piece. And let's talk about the design of a wetsuit. A wetsuit, contrary to, I guess, to what we might normally think, a wetsuit is actually designed to keep you wet. Now, it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's got a purpose. So what happens with a wetsuit is the suit itself absorbs water from its surroundings, and then that water ends up getting trapped between the suit and your skin. And that very, very thin micro layer of water is warmed by your body heat. So the suit basically traps that, and then your body heat warms that. So that's why we want to have a nice, well-fitting suit. If you've got a suit that's loose fitting, then water's just going to be sloshing around in there, and it doesn't do its job. It has to be able to fit tight to you in order for that water to be trapped between the suit and your body, and for the suit to do its job. So wetsuits are insulating, and the wetsuits come in varying weights. So the pictures that you see here, these are 0.5 millimeter and 1 millimeter products. The shirt is a 0.5 millimeter thickness of neoprene, and the bottoms here are 1 millimeter thickness neoprene. As we go up in thickness, we go up in protection levels. So you've probably all seen pictures of the crazy Great Lakes surfers before. And you're thinking, well, how can that person possibly stand that water in that wetsuit? They're wearing a 7 to 10 millimeter thick wetsuit. So they're wearing something that's very, very thick and highly insulative. So that's what they're dealing with there. But like I said, designed to keep you wet, and your body traps the heat between your body and the suit. So this is a 0.5 millimeter and a 1 millimeter. These are NRS products. They're called Hydroskin. And the nice thing about these, you can mix and match pieces. So instead of wearing a full wetsuit, which can get a little bit cumbersome on a somewhat warm day, but the water's a little cooler and we just want to have a little bit of protection, these work great as that first step into a wetsuit. Now we go up from there. We go into this is called a Farmer Brown here. There's a Farmer John, which is a little bit different in terms of the body, but same kind of concept. So this is a Farmer Brown wetsuit, also from NRS, and this is a full body wetsuit. So this particular one has Velcro straps at the shoulders, and you can basically undo those Velcro straps and then just slip into this full suit. So same kind of concept as this one, just this is a 2-piece, this is a 1-piece, and we start to go up in terms of thickness. So this particular one is a 3 mil, so this is designed for cooler water, which I should mention. I want to step back for just a second, and because we'll probably get the question, and we can kind of answer this one now. The question may come up as, at what point do I need a 0.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 3 millimeter on up from there? And that's a hard question to answer because it depends on many, many factors. It depends on the air temperature, depends on the water temperature, depends on your body's ability to compensate for water. Do you run hot? Do you run cold as well? So it's a question that can't readily be answered because it's different for everybody. And that's where that swim test of your gear comes in really handy. If you've swim tested your gear, then you know what to expect with that gear. You know what conditions that gear will support you in and what conditions it will not support you in. So with that one. All right, our next type, the sharp dress paddler, we'll talk a little bit about splash wear. So we've gone from base layer to insulating layer to wetsuit. And now we're into wind layers. So this is a splash jacket. This is also an NRS product here. And this particular one will keep wind off you and it'll keep water off you, but it is not waterproof. It will allow water into the piece. So it's basically just designed to keep water off you. So if you're paddling and you know you're going to get splashed, but you don't want to have have all that water just kind of sitting on you and getting you cold. These are great pieces for that. And I'll show you a long sleeve piece that I've got here in just a minute. This works very well with other protective layers, but it is not a substitute for a dry suit or anything like that. Around the neck here and around the sleeves, so there's actually a Velcro tab. You can see the Velcro tab right here. So the Velcro tab will actually allow you to just kind of cinch it to your wrists, but it is not like a latex gasket that's going to keep water out. It'll just keep some water out. Every time you bring a paddle up high, your arm up high, water is going to run down your hands, going to run down right into your sleeve, and you're going to feel that cold water inside the piece. So it will not keep water. It will not keep you waterproof, but it'll keep you water resistant, I guess. Its more important function is really to keep the wind off the body, though. So dry suit is our next step up, and dry suit gives you what I'll call ultimate cold water protection. So dry suits, most dry suits are Gore-Tex. There are a couple of other fabrics, Event and I forget what, Tropos, I think is the other one that's kind of big lately. But each of those fabrics are breathable, and they will allow air to escape or moisture to escape from your body, but they do not allow moisture to get into the suit. They have waterproof zippers, and we'll show one of those here. So here's one of the waterproof zippers. Very, very heavy duty zipper. And then as you continue zipping the piece in, it'll actually zip into this little pocket. So it completely gets covered by this. They are not insulating. So a dry suit is not a replacement for any of the other layers that we've talked about previously. It's not a replacement for a base layer. It's not a replacement for an insulating layer. In fact, its insulating properties are about the same as a shower curtain. There's literally no insulation at all to a dry suit. But what it does is it gives you ultimate water protection. It will keep the water off your body. I'll show you a dry suit here in a minute, and you'll see this, the cuffs, and they're latex cuffs and a latex gasket that goes around the neck as well. The one downside, if you will call it that, of a dry suit is that dry suits are expensive. You know, you'll typically find a Coquetat dry suit, which is kind of one of the top of the line pieces, and you'll find the Coquetat dry suits run anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200. You can find other brands and other materials that will certainly do a nice job, may not be quite as durable and may not last quite as long, but are still good products, and you can get those down as low as about $500 to $600 for something like that. So I guess when it comes down to it, it is expensive, but you also have to ask the question, how expensive is your life? What's your life worth to you? And how much do you want to extend your paddling season? Personally, as a dry suit owner, I've been able to extend my paddling season and have complete comfort and confidence in my choice to go paddling, because I know that I've got immersion wear. So I'm willing to spend that extra money because I know that I can count on that gear. So, and this is a picture of the kind of the zipper in action. So this is a T-zip. So it actually has a T piece that you can hold on to and you can pull, because these zippers are very, very stiff zippers. They're not easy. The one that I have actually has a cord on it, and I'll use that to pull, because I just can't get enough leverage from the little tiny tab on that. And that's what the idea is behind the T-zip that's in his grip here. Another option in terms of dry wear are these pieces right here. So this is a dry top and a pair of dry pants. So much like we saw with that Hydroskins neoprene layer, the half mil and millimeter layers that we saw earlier, this is a two-piece setup here. So upside is it's less expensive. It is easier to manage. It's not quite as bulky as wearing a dry suit. It does offer cold water protection, but it only offers cold water protection if you stay in your boat and you're well sealed inside your boat. So if you happen to capsize and you have a nice good spray skirt, so that spray skirt doesn't allow a lot of water in, and you have the ability to roll yourself back upright, then you may be okay. But wearing a dry top and then bailing out of your boat and ending up in the water with your lower body still exposed doesn't do you all that good. Even these have, so the tunnel here, so this bottom part actually ends up going below. So it ends up coming down to about this far on the pants. And then the pants actually slip up inside here. So it kind of mates. So they end up crossing one another. So it's not just a seam joint, but it's a cross. And so the water does have to work its way through that entire seam, and it may be a good foot that it has to work its way through, that it's connected from here to here and here to here. But there is still a disconnect there, whereas there's no disconnect with this full dry suit. So again, easier to manage, can be more comfortable, still not insulating, but it's an option for you. I actually have, and I'll show you here, I've got a short sleeve dry top. And you might think that's kind of an oxymoron, right? Why would you want that? On a warm day, but I know that the water temperature is still cold, and I'm okay having my arms exposed because I want that comfort and that freedom. But if I happen to capsize and I know I can roll back up, then I'm still okay in that kind of situation. All right. Care and feeding of cold weather gear. Let's talk a little bit about that. What you see here is actually a hanger. And so what I'm encouraging you to do is first, any cold weather gear that you have, wetsuits, dry suits, any of your other clothing, gloves, etc., hang them immediately. I actually have a hanger just like this. It hangs out in my garage. It lives on the rail of my garage door. And it's there 365 days a year, basically. And as soon as I get home, the very first thing I do is I take all my gear, I hang it all up on there, and I put absolutely everything on there because I want it all to air dry. I don't want to pack gear away and have it end up with mildew or anything like that. So I'll hang dry all my gear immediately. If you are using anything in any salt water, or unfortunately we're not using it this year, but if you were using anything in any chlorinated water as well, if we ever have the opportunity to do any pool sessions again, you'll want to wash the chlorinated water off, and you'll definitely want to wash salt water off. Salt is very corrosive, and anything that salt water gets, it will get into, whether it's clothing, zippers, electronics, anything that you've got that has been exposed to salt water, wash that stuff thoroughly. But hang dry it all, let it air dry. In terms of your other cold weather gear, particularly the dry suits with the latex gaskets and stuff, store them indoors and mostly zipped. When I say mostly zipped, I'll leave mine just a couple inches open in terms of its zipper. But definitely storing indoor, because the wild swings in temperature, it doesn't work well with the latex gaskets. The latex gaskets get all gummy and kind of gross. Also, if you have any cold weather gear, particularly dry suits, you want to lube the zippers for those. Like I mentioned, they're very, very stiff zippers. I have a little stick of beeswax that I bought for $1, and I'll rub that on the zipper a few times a year and keep those going as well. And then oh shoot, there's a picture of it. So this is a different one. This is Zip Tech, same kind of stuff. Full disclosure, you can pay the $10 or $12 for the McNett Zip Tech here, or you can buy a stick of beeswax off Amazon or anywhere else for $1, and it'll do the same thing. So you're welcome to do whatever you want with the other $11. And then the last one is to 303 gaskets. So 303 is just it's a protectant, and kind of like the old school Armor All that you may have used on your car and your wheels and all that sort of stuff back when you were 17 and thought it was fun to do that. But 303 is a protectant that's often used for boats and other equipment. So I'll spray down the latex gaskets on my equipment, and I'll also spray the hatches. I would encourage you to do this as well. I'll spray the hatches on my boat to keep the rubber nice and pliable, and then I'll also use that to spray on the deck and the hull of the boat, just because it makes it shine a little better and kind of makes the water beat up and makes me feel good about the boat, and it makes your boat feel pretty, because boats always like to feel pretty. All right, so we've gone from the outside in. Now we're going to talk some other pieces, and we're going to talk some footwear. So I've got pictures of a couple different pairs of booties here, and booties, much like the wetsuits we talked about earlier, most booties are neoprene. So these are two different NRS products here. They'll have a nice rubber sole, and they're often lined, so there's a nice little fleece layer. And the advantage of booties over many types of shoes is that they can form to fit in your boat. Depending on the size of your boat, you may have a fairly small cockpit or a fairly small foot space in your boat. I know that mine is basically about the limit of my shoe size. So if I had a regular pair of hard sole shoes, I wouldn't be able to fit them in my boat. But these booties will actually conform a little bit better and fit in the boat a little bit better. Now you may be able to see there's two different kinds of soles. So this is a more of a smooth sole and then more of a rugged sole. So here's a picture of the sole of those two. So this is the first one that you saw that has the smoother sole and then the more rugged sole. Think about the environment that you're going to be in most often. And for myself, a lot of times I'm paddling in environments that have a fairly rocky coast. And so something like this, I'm going to feel every tiny pebble that comes underneath my foot. Whereas something like this that has a little bit more of a rugged sole, I'm not going to feel all those pebbles. So just depends on where you are. If you're always on a sandy beach, go for something a little bit more lightweight. If you're on mixed terrain, then maybe something a little bit heavier would work for you as well. This is a different kind. This is more of a tennis shoe style. So it's a mesh body. So there's a mesh upper here, and it does have a regular sole to it. The mesh does drain water, and you've also got holes here to drain water. I think there's a hole in the back as well that will drain water. There's a sticky outsole, so if you're walking along a slippery coast, for example, this will help stick to the rock a little bit better that you're walking on. And not only does it have a hard sole, but it also has sole, right? So this is a stylish looking shoe. You can wear this paddling, you can keep it on and wear it to the pub afterwards and hanging out with your friends. So whereas they would probably look at you a little funny if you walked into the pub wearing these, but these, you're all right. So this is made by a company called Astral, and this is their brewer shoe. For those of you who are big fans of mucky portages and things like that, I'm a kayaker. Kayakers, we don't portage all that much. We tend to go to places that I don't have to haul my boat. So it is what it is, right? So, but for those of you who may be canoeists and love to go to places like the Boundary Waters, for example, and you find that you've got just a whole lot of muck that you're walking through, this is a pair of NRS boundary boots. And so similar, the similar bottom, the shoe style to the Astral Brewer that we saw earlier. It is a neoprene here as well. So it's not going to eject the water, but this one is really going to be, it's going to basically keep more water out than anything, but similar kind of shoe look here. And then you've also got some fantastic shin protection. So as you're bashing through the woods, getting from your portage point to your other portage point, rocks and thorns and all that stuff that you're encountering is not going to be any match for this hard protection here. So solid piece here. Accessorize. So we talked about different kinds of heating and cooling earlier, and sunscreen is something that you always want to wear, regardless of the time of year that we're out, because not only do we have sun, but we've got reflective radiation as well. So we talked about that reflective heating, and even on a 30-degree day, that water is still reflecting the sun. It's reflecting it back at you. So we want to have sunscreen. So good hat is another one as well. So here's an example of a baseball hat style. I have a number of these kinds of hats. The advantage of these kinds of hats is that they are synthetic. So again, not having a heavy cotton hat on my head, nice synthetic hat, and they're nice and lightweight. And then what I'll often do as well is take that hat off, dunk that in the water, put that hat back on. I've got a nice cold layer on top. So quite an advantage there. And another picture of a different style of hat here. This is a wide brim hat and give you a better sun protection with something like this one. Another piece of gear that you see in this particular picture is a pair of sunglasses. So always want to make sure we've got good sun protection. You may be able to see it, but right here, oops, there we go. There's a little piece of yellow right here. So that little tiny piece of yellow is my glasses retainer. So my buddy Randy, I don't think he's on tonight, but I think Randy's lost five pairs of glasses, and all of his are prescription glasses. And Randy doesn't seem to learn that he needs to wear a glasses retainer, because about every 2 years, Randy loses another pair of glasses. So I think he's about due this next year. So hopefully he has learned the rule. And incidentally, I always carry a couple extra straps. I always offer them to Randy, but sometimes Randy doesn't take them. Anyway, always wear your glasses, always wear your retaining straps. The pair of glasses that I actually have here in this picture are floating sunglasses. So that's kind of cool. So if I was to ever lose the glasses, they are still going to float. So they're a company called Rios, R-H-E-O-S, that makes those. And they don't pay me to tell you that. Gloves. So pluses and minuses to gloves. So the ones we're seeing here, again, another pair of NRS Hydra Skin gloves. These are a lightweight glove, and they've got a grippy palm. There's pluses and minuses to having a grippy palm. So me personally, I like to be able to have my hands slide along the paddle. I like to be able to feel the paddle. I like to be able to adjust my position on the paddle. So I'm not a huge fan of gloves. And if I can ever do without gloves, I will do without gloves, even though my hands get ridiculously cold. And I'll show you a way to be able to possibly go without gloves here in just a moment. But this is a lighter weight pair of gloves as we get heavier. This is a much heavier neoprene here, and this is a pair of mitts. This is I think the toaster mitts. And mittens are always going to be warmer than gloves because your fingers together will warm each other. So if it's really cold, I would encourage you to wear mitts. And then another option is something called a pair of pogies. So it doesn't really work well for those of you paddling a canoe, but for those of us who are paddling a kayak, what happens here is that this actually Velcro flap just opens up, and then you slide the paddle shaft through here, wrap this right over the top, and it basically is a surrogate glove, if you will. So you can still have a full, clear hand on the paddle shaft and be able to slide that handle on the paddle shaft and get a feel for the paddle shaft, and then still have protection from the pogies themselves. All right. And if you're like one of these complete crazies here and looking for more winter protection, you'll see that they've got hoods on. So this hardcore winter hood here is also something that you could have for additional protection. So this is a neoprene hood, and if you've got a foam ball for a head, it would look just like that. And there's a cinch here, so you can cinch that closer to the face, and then you can also cinch basically it'll cinch the whole thing up right around you. So with that, I'm going to see if there's any questions here. We'll get into, I see lots of questions in the chat. So let's see if there's anything else that we have here that I haven't answered. Hope you'll touch on footwear. Helen, yes, I did touch on footwear, so we're good. I had a question about merino base layers. So merino is basically a type of wool. Any wool concept is going to be a fantastic option. So definitely, Hannah. So that's definitely a good one. Like I said, I've got a few different pairs of wool base layers that I enjoy. Let's see, Eric. Don't see the better ones working out. All right. Is that a one piece or just a jacket? So I'm not sure which one that was referring to. So Eric or TJ, if you've got an additional question, if you wanted to unmute yourself, and unless I answered that one for you already. Oh, I see David answered. There's the jacket. Looks like a one-piece jacket. View of rash guard fabric. All right, so rash guard fabric. Rash guard is generally you're going to find is like that. It's kind of a quasi neoprene, almost like the what was it, the Coolabar stuff. So it's kind of an in between that stuff. So sensible base layer, yes. I mean, it's not that different from the Coolabar stuff that we saw earlier. All right, so Helen's question, can the neoprene boots get wet like my wetsuit for feet? Eventually my feet get cold, can I wear wool socks with? Absolutely. Consider that to be a base layer. I almost always wear socks with mine. Unless it's summer and it's really warm, but I'll wear a pair of socks. And incidentally, in my dry suit as well, always 100% of the time, even in the heat of the summer, I'll wear a pair of socks, because stinky feet in dry suit, you'll never get that smell out, ever, ever, ever. All right, I think I answered that one. There we go. Hats for cold water. So Helen, I think we answered that one with the hats we just saw. Steve, they make canoe pogies. That's pretty awesome. I did not know that. All right. And there we go. All right. So any other questions that I haven't answered? If you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Meanwhile, I'm just going to switch over to a different camera here. I'm going to show you a couple of other pieces of gear. So give me just a moment. All right, if you, hold on. All right, so I'm thinking you're still able to hear me here. You're gonna hear me and then see me in the other camera. So if you look at the top left corner, or sorry, top right corner of your screen, you'll see a little button that says view. And if you choose that view button, and then if you choose speaker view, you will then see me in a larger format. And actually, I'm gonna take the slideshow down here for just a second. So give me a second here.
John, do you want to try using the microphone on your laptop instead? Because when you get away from your camera, it gets the voice gets a little quiet.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So give me just a moment here. I need to pull the share down. So is the share off there or is it still on? No, there's the share. Okay. I'm going to pull that off and give me a second to switch microphones. There we go. All right. So I'm going to show you a couple of different pieces of gear. So again, if you go to the top right-hand corner of your screen, choose view and choose speaker view, you'll see me in a larger setting. And I'm going to show you a few things here. All right. So I was talking about those pogies earlier. And so this is the pair of pogies. And so the idea is that I would open that up. Take the paddle shaft, put that right around the paddle shaft. And so now it's connected to the shaft and I can insert my hand into that. And now I've got control and I can slide along that shaft and use that item. So that's the pogies. We took a look at some splashware earlier, and I'll show you what I was talking about with the splashware. So this cuff at the sleeve will end up going around. I'm going to slide this over my wrist here so you'll see what that looks like. So if I put that through, my wrist is through there, and I can use this Velcro, and I can tighten that up. And so but I can still get water through there. So it's not completely tight, but water will end up coming through, but it ends up shedding most of the water away. So there's a gasket around a closure around the wrist. And then there's also a closure around the neck. So if my head was through here, there's a piece of Velcro, and then I can Velcro that and tighten that around the neck. Right. And then, so this is just a piece of nylon that ends up fitting around the neck. But again, water can get through that because it's just simply a piece of nylon. But the advantage of something like this is that it does shed water away. It keeps water off you, but it is not waterproof. In terms of some of the dry wear, actually, let me look at the dry suit first here. That one. So this is the dry suit, and I was talking about the latex gaskets. So this is a latex gasket around the neck. So this would end up sitting right over my head, and I would basically fit this on over my head, and then this ends up creating a tight seal around the head, and then also a tight seal around the wrist. Okay, so there's a wrist gasket there. my wrist would come through there and seal on tight. The zipper here. So here's that zipper. I mentioned that zipper is real stiff. So you can see there's that zipper and that pull tab. And then as I close that up, that will end up closing up and sealing right there. So, and these are, it's a full immersion wear. And so at the bottom, there are socks that are sewn into the piece. And so what's going to happen is and I've tested this before in 30s and 40s degree water, and it works out just fine. This piece right here actually Velcros open, and then this fits underneath or over the top of my spray skirt. So I would put the spray skirt on and then have that spray skirt come up around my rib cage here, and then this tunnel actually fits right over that and creates a seal, and then the all-important zipper here as well. Booties. So I mentioned the booties earlier. So this is a pair of the booties that has the nice hard sole to it. And let's see, I can get my camera there so you can see that sole to it. And then I also mentioned a dry top. So this is a level 6 dry top. And so this is the short sleeve dry top. It's the same kind of concept, except it doesn't have the pants to it. And this one has a tunnel as well. So the spray skirt will fit up underneath this layer. And so this layer ends up connecting to going around my body. And then this one ends up going, the tunnel or the top of the spray skirt ends up going between these two layers. And much like the full dry suit, this has a latex gasket around the neck and then latex gasket around the upper arms. This one. And what else do I have in here? I do have got a wetsuit here as well. So this one is a Farmer John shorty, and so this one sleeveless and short sleeve or short pants. And then for all of my clothing gear, I carry all of that gear in a mesh bag. In fact, I use a mesh bag. I've got one mesh bag that I carry my clothing items in, and I've got one mesh bag that I carry all the rest of my gear in. And advantage of the mesh bag is that when I've got it in my car, I don't have that mesh bag. Sorry, if I've got it in my car and it wasn't a mesh bag, then all that stuff is just sitting in there, kind of rotting by itself. It's end up, I can potentially leave it in there, forget about it or whatnot. Whereas if I've got it in a mesh bag, it's going to breathe and it's going to end up air drying a little bit at least, as opposed to being confined inside another bag. One other piece that I have here is this, and it may just look like a regular ordinary towel, but this one is actually, it's got a elastic gather around the top here, and it looks like a skirt because it is kind of a skirt. And real men wear skirts, right? So what I'll do is after I get out, I'll end up putting this on. And now I've got a portable changing tent. So I can be there at the side of the water and I can change right by my car without showing the world what the world doesn't want to see. And then when I'm done with this, pack it up, put it away with the rest of my clothes, and all goes well. So this one's actually a commercial one that I won in a raffle or something at a kayak symposium. But you can make one of these very easily. If you know somebody who's handy with a sewing machine, you can easily make one of these by elastic gather and an old terry cloth towel. So find a beach towel that your kids are no longer using, and now you've got a way. Looking around here to see if I had anything else, and that's what I had for clothing here. So Let me close this one out and I'll come over to the other one. All right, let's see if there's any other questions in the chat that we can answer. Let's see, I see some that have been answered already. All right, recommended shopping venues. Let's see, base layer. Hold on a second. Let me just make sure I've got. All right, so should I wear base layer under my half mil hydro skin? I would. I would wear something that's nice and tight for you. Again, you don't want that to be really loose, but it also depends on the air temperature and the water temperature. There's a lot of factors that will determine that. Recommended shopping venues, websites, or stores. All right, my preference is always going to be a store first. Stores support us. We need to support our stores and we need to support our local businesses as well. Favorites for me, of course, Rutabaga up in Wisconsin does a great job. I would encourage you, wherever you're going, go somewhere where they actually paddle. I know that when I buy my gear, I want to know that I bought my gear from somebody who actually knows what that gear is and how that gear is intended to be used. If I'm going to buy a boat for the first time, if I'm going to buy a paddle for the first time, I want to know that that person's going to ask me the right questions to make sure that I'm getting the right gear. Same thing with clothing or any other accessories. I want to buy it from a place that knows what they're doing. And again, we want to support our local retailers. So Rutabaga does a great job up in Madison, Rocktown Adventures out in Rockford, and there's probably a couple other locals in the area that I may be mistaken. So if somebody has a nice local outfitter that you want to plug here, feel free to put that in there as well into the chat. So thank you, TJ. It's been gear that I've accumulated over a number of years, but again, it's stuff that I know it's going to keep me safe and keep me warm and give me the opportunity to support the people that I'm with. If I have to worry about my own personal condition, then I can't be of support to everybody else that I'm with. So when I'm out leading a group, my responsibility is not to me, but it's to everybody else, and I need to make sure that I'm safe. All right, how long do modern PFDs last? Generally, about 5 years is the kind of limit you'll see. Steve, thank you. So, cold enough for the dry suit. What is the right headgear? I don't see anyone but surfers and Navy SEALs wearing the full neoprene headgear. Helen, that's another one that's it's a personal decision. It doesn't necessarily when you say cold enough for the dry suit. So again, I'm dealing with what's the water temperature as opposed to the air temperature. So the air temperature might be a whole heck of a lot colder, and I might want something more on my head than, or I might want something less on my head. It's an it depends question. If I'm going to be in the water like those surfers and everything, then I'm probably going to want something neoprene on my head that I know is going to protect me because I'm going to be in there for a while. Those surfers, they're immersed in water the entire time. All right, Steve, thank you. Speedo make great mesh bags. All right. Surf ski. All right, sometimes I surf ski on the big lake. I want to have a tether when I fall off. I favor a piece of paracord from the PFD. I see ankle straps. Any reason the ankle is better than the PFD? All right, so you can go back and forth on tethers. Pluses and minuses to tethers. A tether basically is the amount of rope in the water. And if I've got rope in the water, I want to make sure that I've got a way to cut that rope if I ever need to. And that would take place anywhere. So I'm not a big fan of tethers, but if you have to tether, I would tether with something that either has a quick release to it, if that's possible. When you see ankle straps, the ankle is more likely to get in your way when you're in the water because you're kicking and thrashing around as opposed to something on the PFD, but the PFD is probably going to be more restrictive to you when you're in the boat. So those are just personal observations. I don't have firsthand experience using a tether on either a surf ski or in a kayak. I've only got experience using a tether on a stand-up paddleboard. So don't know if I could really help you out with that one, Eric. I get cold in my wetsuit when I'm not in water. What do I wear over? All right, so we talked a little bit about those outer layers. So those wind layers are fantastic. So the splash top that I showed you, the blue one here, or as a picture of a red splash top earlier, something like that is a great wind layer. So you got your insulating layers in terms of the wetsuit or fleece or whatnot, but the wind and that convective cooling that we talked about earlier is what's going to cool you down very quickly. So that's what could help you with that. All right. Rescue vest. All right. Any other questions?
Okay, John, I'll ask you a question.
All right. Before we wrap up, I just want to show you a couple of other quick things here real fast. So I know that many of you on the call are already Prairie State Canoeists members, and a couple of you may not be Prairie State Canoeist members. And if you're not, I would highly encourage you to become a Prairie State Canoeist member. We do have an opportunity this year where for the 2021 year that we are offering complimentary memberships. So if you go to prairiestatecanoeists.org, you'll see the address there on the bottom. You can sign up and be a complimentary member for this year and have all the rights and benefits of a member. That means you have the opportunity to participate in these virtual learning sessions, which we've got a few more that are coming up. We've got, in fact, if you go to prairiestatecanoeists.org, you'll see the list of all of those. Paul Klanowski is going to talk to us about the Lake County Forest Reserve volunteer program and all the good work that they've done from a cleanup standpoint. Terry, and I'm not going to pronounce his last name right, Terry P., is going to share some information from us or with us from the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. And I am doing another presentation on March 23rd, and we're going to do a historical tour of Isle Royal. We've also got a lot of on-water safety and skills programs. So we are currently working on our schedule for those, and we'll have those schedules up soon for any classes that you're welcome to attend. And then we've got day and regional trips. So there's actually quite a few trips already out on the calendar at prairiestatecanoeists.org. So I encourage you to check those out as well. Find some paddling friends. We're here to help you out with that. So that and a couple of other plugs here. I'm going to be at Canoecopia virtually. I hope many of you will be at Canoecopia as well. I'm actually doing 4 different presentations at Canoecopia. I'll perfectly pack your kayak for a multi-day trip. So for those of you that want to know how to put all that crazy stuff inside a boat, we'll go through that process. We're also talking 5 things that I wish someone told me when I started kayaking. So some of the things that we talked about today with gear, we'll go through in that same presentation, but we'll add 4 others to it as well. We'll also talk group leadership for amazing day trips. And then I'll also do a presentation on power to the paddle, exercises to improve your canoe and kayak paddling. Some other resources that are available for you. I've put a copy of this presentation in PDF format out on the website that you see listed here. So paddlingexercises.com/PSC. And then I've also put some links to some of the products that we just went through. So some of the things that you saw pictures of in the presentation, you'll be able to see those online as well. And then completely shameless self-promotion here. I am the author of a book called Power to the Paddle, and you'll find that at paddlingexercises.com. There's also a companion DVD that goes along with it that shows the exercises in action. And then the last shameless promotion here is a podcast that I run. It's actually celebrating its 1-year anniversary tomorrow. And so we've had 1 year of celebrating the stories of people doing fantastic things from the seat of a boat, primarily kayaks. But I've had the opportunity to interview people from all around the world. I actually interviewed a couple this morning from their home in the Lake District in the UK. And we talked about their paddle around the South Island of New Zealand, the North Island of New Zealand, all in 2 separate trips. And then their 2,700 kilometer journey along the length of Patagonia and rounding Cape Horn in kayaks. So some great conversations. And if you're a podcast listener, or even if you're not yet a podcast listener, I encourage you to check that out as well. Fun for me, fun for you. So with that, last slide here is just contact information. So I've got my email address and the 2 websites that I just showed you there. So if you've got any additional questions at any time, feel free to reach out to me. Be happy to help you out and answer any other questions. So with that, are there any other questions that we can finish off? Seeing none?
Sure, I have one.
Appreciate everybody's time tonight. Oh,
I have a
Pete,
question.
do you have a question?
Yeah, okay.
You're on mute.
Pardon?
I think you're still
Okay.
on mute.
If,
I'm on mute.
Am I unmuted? Okay.
No, go ahead.
There we go. I was on mute.
Okay. If you have a wetsuit, wetsuit keeps you warm by the water next to your body. Well, you don't want to get wet if you're out there. So, I mean, you put your wetsuit on and it only heats you up if you go in the water, right?
Not necessarily. So it's a great question. There's two ways. So actually the thickness of the neoprene layer does add insulation, so it helps keep you warm. And then as you're in water, despite having water, being in contact with water, your body heat warms the water between the suit. So it kind of a dual purpose.
Okay.
But be careful, once the neoprene gets wet, maybe from splashing or something, the evaporative cooling will make you very cold, which is why Helen had a question about you should wear a windproof layer over it if you want to keep warm.
Correct. Yep. So.
John, I had a question about all that.
Sure.
Okay, a spring day, the air temperature is beautiful. The sun is out, it's 85 degrees, but the water is real cold. So you put on your dry suit or something and you're not in the water, you're not wet. And how do you keep from being too hot as long as you haven't dumped into the water?
All right. So the dry suit, I'll use that as an example. Dry suits are breathable. So I've worn my dry suit in 80-degree temperatures, and it'll still allow me to breathe. It'll still breathe well. Now, that's one of the things of the layering as well. So I might not wear as much underlayer underneath that dry suit. So I know that the water's cold, but depending on how long I think I might be in the water, where I am relative to the shore, how fast I think I can get myself back out of the boat, if I'm with other people who I know that can get me out of the water and back into the boat. So there's a lot of factors that would determine how much I might wear underneath that particular suit. If I wasn't wearing a dry suit and I was wearing a wetsuit, then I might wear fewer layers on top of that as well. Does that help, Milt?
Yes, thank you.
Sure
I have
thing.
another question. The Tribune a few days ago had an article on the front page about 3 women that were going swimming in bathing suits when there was ice floating in the water. How do their bodies survive that?
All right, so great question. And so some of you may have been thinking, hey, I saw this article and you're talking to me about cold shock and how come they aren't susceptible to cold shock? So the difference there is that they are willing volunteers basically, and they're prepared for it. They're mentally prepared for it, right? And they're adjusting to it over time. So as opposed to just surprise, I'm jumping in to cold water, they're easing into that cold water. And then, like I said, they're mentally prepared. I know what I'm getting into. If we're paddling along and we're not expecting to go in and suddenly we're in that water, we're shocked. So all those surprises happen to come. Now, do I think they're completely crazy? Absolutely. I think they're completely nutbag. Yeah. I don't want to be in water that cold. So I see another question that came up: down or polyfill under dry suit? All right. So the answer to that, again, it depends. You're going to stay wet. So having down, it's not going to be a problem, but that's an awful lot of stuff. You're going to end up looking like the Michelin Man if you have too much stuff on underneath you, which incidentally, you can burp a dry suit. And what I mean by that is when you put the suit on, it basically seals you in, and then you end up kind of puffing out because your body heat fills the suit. So you basically have to kind of stretch the neck gasket a little bit and let that air out. But you don't want to burp the suit so much that it ends up being tight to your body. You want to leave a little bit of air between the suit and your body to allow the fill of your inner layers, whether it's down or poly, whichever you prefer, to be able to have that fluff. So I don't wear any down underneath mine. That would be too much stuff for me to have, but I do wear some poly. I see another question here. If I wanted to go canoeing in a local river tomorrow, what should I wear? Air 40, water 40. All right. So again, I'm going to go back to, I'm dressing for the water temperature. I'm dressing to be in that water. All right. So I wouldn't necessarily want to be going from, my comfort level, even though the air is 40. my body temperature is 98.6 or so. Suddenly I go into that 40-degree water. If I'm not dressed for that, I'm still not going to be very comfortable. So for me, I'm going to wear my dry suit. And you're welcome. Other questions? All right.
A fantastic talk, John.
Thank you.
If anyone is interested, I've videotaped this talk, and if people are interested, let me know. And if there's some interest, then I will try to post it someplace where people can view it after the fact.
All right.
This was one of the most informative talks I've ever seen. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I appreciate everybody joining me this evening. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules. And Milt, I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to help moderate the session as well and get it set up for us. I strongly encourage everybody to come to the other sessions that we've got. We've got a great lineup of folks that are going to be spending some time with you, teaching you some cool things. And we're going to continue doing these. We'll probably do them less in the summer, but we'll do some more. And we're going to continue doing these types of things throughout the year next year as well. Over the last year, we've all, unfortunately and unplanned, gotten good at doing Zoom meetings. So let's start taking advantage of it for something fun. So with that, I thank you all for your time. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.